Yeah, thanks, Lucia. Yeah, it's great. It's a great question, and I mean, essentially, the report that we do, and it's the second major piece um, of analysis of media coverage and communications in the sustainable finance and ESG space. So we did one last year that focused essentially on how asset management companies are communicating about ESG. This year we've gone a little bit broader, and this is a report which ran in the summer. We've gone a little bit broader, and that was to look at really how the narrative has changed in sustainable finance and ESG communications. So not just on asset management, but we looked at a whole range of different organizations within financial services generally. And to do this, we kind of looked at two things. One was how the press is reporting on various issues within that space, and also how communications professionals are perceiving this space. We looked at over 25,000 articles from our global offices across 20 major media houses, international media houses, as a kind of representative sample of how the global press is reporting on sustainable finance and ESG. We also spoke to around 30 or 40 or so contacts in the media space from global media houses, so actual journalists that are reporting on these issues, but also people in the comms and marketing functions for a range of different financial service companies. What we were kind of looking at is kind of how mentions of ESG and sustainable finance is increasing. In 2021 in particular, ESG rose from 5,200 in 2020 to 8,000 in 2021, so a rise of 54%. So there's continued trajectory around that as a search term. But we also in this research looked at how there's a shift going on from away from just reporting on the damage and the tragic issues caused by climate change to more kind of solutions orientated coverage. So that's looking at mentions of carbon trading, of natural capital, of ESG funds, of sustainability linked loans, things like that, because we're curious now to understand what are companies doing to address the challenges posed by climate change. And it's something we heard a lot from in the research. From the journalist that we spoke to, who said there's been quite a lot of conversations were had around the fact there's been an awful lot said about pledging, about actions that need to take place, and there needs to be a shift now more towards what are those actions, what are those transitional things that need to take place. And COP is obviously going on now in Egypt. There has been a degree of focus on that, which is great. There's still quite a lot of activity going on around pledges and essentially in many parts replaying the many of the agreements so far, but generally speaking, the research is kind of looking at that shift from just focusing on the issues, which is important, of course, and the pledges to address those. But then there needs to be more of a shift, much more towards the solutions that are going to create that important transition. Yeah, great question, and it's it's an increasingly important product area within financial service companies. Essentially, when we're talking about sustainable finance, we're looking at a few things. One is how firms in the traditional lending space, so essentially, banks, I would say, are creating products that are rooted in sustainability focused goals. So things like sustainability linked loans, essentially whereby the interest rate goes down, becomes more positive for the company that's taking out the loan if they can demonstrate a significant shift towards a more sustainable way of doing business. We're also looking at things like ESG funds, impact funds. So these are products that asset managers are selling to clients. So essentially, that kind of intersection between sustainability and the goals around sustainability and traditional finance, traditional capital markets. So that's kind of what we're looking at when we talk about that. Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly becoming much stronger as an understanding and as a skill set as well. I think, and quite a few people we spoke to in the comms function as for our research, and I certainly feel like this as well, working in this industry, that you know 3-4 years ago it was something that you had to kind of run a campaign on or talk about a little bit to journalists. ESG was kind of a novelty at that stage. It was something that wasn't so ubiquitous, but now it is. It's kind of everywhere, and I think because of that, comms professionals have had to become that much more specialized. The media is, you know, has become very advanced in their understanding, really good quality journalism coming out in this space. So as a comms professional and a company that wants to sort of talk about these things, you've had to become so much more expert at it. And we're finding now that, you know, communications professionals are becoming very entrenched in conversations with their senior leadership teams and boards about sustainability, as it becomes really a strategic imperative for many companies to be taking much more seriously. And as a result of that, the comms function is becoming incredibly influential in kind of steering the business and the way the business communicates around sustainability to a position of being much more quality, entrenched in quality, doing it right, really thinking about what makes a good story, what makes an authentic and compelling communication strategy. So I think, quite, there's obviously more work to be done. It's a highly technical and science-based topic ultimately. You're seeing much more specialist people being recruited into that space, I believe. But I think there's a lot of upskilling going on as well, and it's certainly getting much better. Yeah, great question. I mean, I've sort of touched on this already. I think that the way the media has evolved, and you're seeing, major media houses really investing quite hard in um, sustainability and ESG focused media platforms like Bloomberg Green, for example. Obviously climate is one of the 10 critical themes for the Financial Times that it focuses on in its reporting. So there's an awful lot of investment going on there. And I think that's fantastic. I can't fault really media houses for that at all. I think and this doesn't happen as much as it used to, I believe. I think it's important with that kind of spectre of greenwashing and more companies doing sustainability or communications around sustainability more. It's not being kind of led down the garden path and being sold a story that isn't as quality or tangible or impactful as it should be. And I think in general, media are much more skeptical, and I think that skepticism is good. It's healthy. It helps catch the bad guys, and it keeps everything much more accountable, which is really important. So I think what I you know to turn that into a positive, what I hope we continue to see is just really good quality, insightful, in-depth journalism that kind of doesn't just take a story and runs with it, but they think about the whole picture, and they think about challenging the story that they're being given to a certain extent. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's what we think about all the time, and I think it's there's probably two main strands to this in terms of sort of a takeaway for comms and PR professionals. I think firstly, making sure the story that you have is true, it's honest, it's authentic, and it kind of has the components that help you demonstrate that. I think what's and I touched on this earlier, and our research talks about it, but this kind of shift away from kind of pledges to solution orientated PR, I think making sure there's really credible people that are kind of driving that story, that are on the front line of climate change is critical. People that can add real expertise, have 15, 20, even more plus years experience of working in climate science, climate change, climate investing, impact investing, making sure that they are the stars of the show. and that senior leadership teams are kind of upskilled to talk about that. Having data, being able to demonstrate change is critical as well, I think. So, if you announce an initiative or a new product, coming back to that in 6 months' time and showing the media, showing the world how this is progressing is critically important. So that's really the second part, I should say, sorry, is really that it needs to be measurable. It needs to, you need to be held accountable for that. You can't just sort of cast off a boat adrift into the world and hope that it's going to land at the right place. I think you need to sort of show how progress is moving. I think you need to show the real impact it's having in the lives of communities, in the climate itself, in a transition away from fossil fuels, whatever it might be. Really being able to demonstrate that around. I mean, I think if you're an asset manager, for example, and you want to push the companies that you're investing in to be more transparent in their governance structures, to orchestrate change, to transition. That's a place that you can play at. And I've personally got experience of helping to PR asset managers when they go to shareholder meetings and AGMs, where they are actively pushing management teams and boards to become more accountable around these issues. And I think that's a great story. And particularly, I mean, today there was a really interesting story that came out, that was the Canadian State Pension Fund saying that they're going to essentially divest from companies that clearly aren't taking ESG and sustainability seriously. There's a real governance issue at the heart of that. I think companies that want to continue to attract investment from fund managers, to continue to grow, to scale, and actually help with their transition, that kind of starts in the boardroom. So governance and being held accountable and showing you've got the right structure and that you're ultimately engaged and trying to sort of differentiate the way you're doing things is critical. So I personally feel it's I think, like you pointed out in your question, it's probably the slightly hazier, the lesser known angle around ESG, but it's a critically important one, and one where I think companies can do some really interesting storytelling. I think we're going to see an evolution. Well, you're seeing already, but an evolution of the ESG kind of product area or brand, I suppose. And I don't think ESG is going to go away necessarily. I think there's been an awful lot of work to kind of entrench it in the way that investment management has done, that traditional banking and capital markets has done, that companies are demonstrating a more sustainable way of working as well. I think to make it more relatable to people, and the research you pointed out there shows that people on the ground in Brazil are highly aware of the environmental issues in the world, and I think making it a little bit more relatable, talking more about the impact, rather than having an ESG fund, have a water fund or a solar fund, or a focus on funds that are preserving the natural environment. Our research showed a huge increase in media mentions in natural capital, for example. So, investing in the preservation of the natural environment as a way to mitigate and reduce the effects of climate change. We saw an increase of 113% between 2020 and 2021. So I think solutions that ultimately kind of feel a little bit more real, more tangible, and people can understand, I want to put my money in solar. I feel that's a way to go, or I feel it's really important to put my money in the restoration of mangroves or the protection of rainforests, or whatever it might be, as a means of transitioning the way that I do business. So I think trying to make it more relatable is important, and I think you're just going to see not so much a fragmentation, but an evolution of how these topics are spoken about and how products, financial products, and investment decisions are made. No, I mean, I think, just some closing thoughts, and that, at the end of the day, climate change is a deeply personal thing for many people, and I think it's why you see so much interesting discourse and debate, and criticism that goes on in the space as well. I think good communications, it needs it needs to be sensitive, it needs to be authentic. At the end of the day, I think positions of leadership are really important. I think the communications framework around these issues are really is really important, and needs to be done right. You need specialist knowledge, specialist views about how to do it right. I would say it's not something that you can just walk into and expect a kind of authentic storyline to land. There are so many important stakeholder groups, ranging from indigenous communities through to big business, through to traditional capital markets, regulators, politicians, and just people on the street at the end of the day that are trying to live greener and better lives around these issues. And I think a multifaceted communications approach is really critical, that covers all of those bases. So I think it's challenging to get it right. You see lots of examples of companies getting it right, lots of examples of them getting it wrong. I think taking taking the communication strategy around these things seriously is critically important.